I'm Kathy with the Delafield Quilt Company, and today I'm going to show you how to make this ironing board. This is a great board to have right next to your sewing machine. When you're sewing small pieces or small blocks and need to press the seams open right away, you've got this right by you and it's convenient. It also looks a little nicer than a regular ironing board. To create this project, you're going to need some supplies and some tools. For tools, you're going to need the rotary cutter, a sewing needle, and a quilter's ruler. For supplies, you're going to need some thread, a mini charm pack, and this is Shine On from Bonnie and Camille from Moda. You're going to also need a board, and this is one that I just purchased at a local craft store. It was actually meant to be a wall hanging, but it works perfect for this purpose. And then you're going to need some ironing board fabric. Your ironing board fabric is going to need to be big enough that the piece can extend 1 inch on 3 of the sides and 2 inches on the last side. You also need some batting. You need 1 piece that's going to be essentially for the quilt top. This will need to be as big as your board and a little bit more so you can trim it down. You're also going to need enough batting to wrap around your board twice. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so now I'm going to start laying out the pieces for the quilt top. I'm going to use every single one of these squares that are in the mini charm pack. So we need to lay this out. So we have 7 mini charm squares on the top, and then we'll go 6 charm squares down the side. Go ahead and start sewing by rows and then sew your rows together. Okay, I've now got my quilt top all sewn together, but before I go ahead and quilt it, I'm just going to make sure that it's going to be big enough. So you want to make sure your quilt top has enough area to extend at least a 1/2 inch on 3 of the sides of the board and 2 inches on the bottom. Since mine does cover that, I'm going to go ahead and quilt it, and then I'll show you the next step. So I went ahead and quilted the top. I did not put a backing fabric on it because I feel with this warm and natural batting it's pretty sturdy without it. Next I need to trim it down to match the board. So I'm going to put the board back on it, and I'm going to essentially center it so that as best I can I have the squares evenly placed across the board. It's going to be a little bit off on the bottom, but that's okay. Alright, so I've got it centered out. I'm almost 2 inches to the edge. I'm going to actually go a little bit less than 2 inches on mine just because I want my squares a little bit more centered. I think it'll still be okay because the 2 inches is really just extra so that when we go to hand sew the unfinished edge, we have enough to tuck it in. And my board measures approximately 10 inches, just shy of 13 inches. All right, I think I've got it pretty well centered, so I am just going to mark where the board is so that when I do the 1/2 inch from that, I know where to go. Okay, so I have the top trimmed up. I'm going to set this aside, and then I'm going to get out the ironing fabric. Just going to double check. I have pre-cut this. It should be the width length of your board, and then the seam allowance is going to include whatever the thickness of your board is. In this case it's a 1/2 inch plus an additional 1/2 inch. So I went 1 inch outside of 3 of the sides, and then again on the bottom you're going to go a total of 2 inches then. And the next thing I need to do is sew 2 of the sides. I'm going to right sides together, lay the ironing fabric on top of the quilted top. I'm going to pin along one side to secure it. And then I'm going to move this other side so that these two sides line up. You are going to notice a gap here, and that's okay. We're going to take care of that in the next step. Now I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch along each side. Alright, so I've now sewn a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides. So in this next step, I'm going to take care of the slack that you'll see in the ironing fabric. And I'm going to do that by folding it over on each corner. So I'm just taking the fabric, folding it in on itself, and then I'm going to take a pin and secure it. Then I'm going to do the same on this other side, pulling this so that I've taken up all of the slack, and I'm going to fold it again in the corner and then pin it to secure it. So I'll try to show that a little closer. You can see it just essentially folded in. And then we're going to go ahead and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch right on the top. Now that it's sewn, you can see where it's just tucked in a little bit on each of these corners. Now the next step is to turn it inside out. We've essentially created a pocket that we're going to slip the board once we've covered it with batting into. Make sure you get the corners poked out as much as you can on these pockets. If you need to, you might want to use a blunt tool to help poke those out. Our next step is to cover the board with our batting. So I've already pre-cut this, but I'm going to trim it again because it's a little bit larger than the board. I'm essentially just going to wrap it around twice. And you do want your edges of your batting to come to cover the edges of your board. So I'm just pulling it a little bit just to get it a little more tighter around the board. If you have a lot hanging over, go ahead and trim that down. Okay, now that I've got some of the excess off, I'm going to go ahead and insert it into the pocket that we made earlier. Okay, once you have the cover on, just flip it over and make sure it's somewhat even on all your sides. And then we're going to tuck in the top part so that it lines with the edge of the board. You want to put a few pins in there for now. We'll take those out in a second just to help keep that in place. And then we're going to fold in the sides just like you're wrapping a present. So when you tuck it in, you just need to leave enough out that you can bring it up to the quilt top so that we'll be able to hand stitch that close. When you're ready, go ahead and stick a few pins in and then we'll hand stitch it. So for the corners, I just made sure they were tucked in so it looked more like a mitered edge on the corners. And now that I have it all pinned in, I'm going to go ahead and hand stitch this using a whip stitch to close this. When you're hand stitching it, it's best to put in a few extra strips right in the corner since there will be a little more stress at those points. I'm keeping my stitches somewhat close together just to make sure that these seams will be nice and sturdy. And now, just like that, we have a new ironing board. Thank you very much for joining us today at the Delafield Quilt Company. If you like our channel, please consider subscribing and visit us at www.delafieldquiltco.com. Thank you.